Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you enjoy the story. I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I love hearing from all of you. Now let me tell you about the day I never expected my morning drive to turn into something unforgettable. It started as a regular Thursday morning. The sun had just begun to peek over the rooftops, casting a soft golden light over my quiet suburban street. I had my coffee in one hand, my keys in the other, when I noticed little Tommy, my neighbor's son, standing at the curb with his backpack slung over one shoulder. His mom was running late, as she often did, juggling calls and bags and the chaos of everyday life. Without thinking too much, I waved him over. "Hey, Tommy, need a ride?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though I could tell he hesitated for just a second before climbing into my car. He had this shy, thoughtful expression, like he was carrying something on his little shoulders that nobody else noticed. The car smelled faintly of the cinnamon air freshener I'd forgotten to change last week, mixed with the lingering aroma of my coffee. Tommy adjusted his backpack and gave me a small, nervous smile. "Thanks, Mrs. Lane," he said quietly. There was something in his voice that morning, something unusually earnest. We drove in companionable silence for a few blocks, the hum of the engine and the distant chirping of birds filling the space. I glanced at him, catching him staring out the window. His eyes were soft, but there was a weight there that tugged at my chest. "You okay?" I asked gently, unsure if I should pry. Tommy hesitated, and then, in a voice so small I almost missed it, he said, Sometimes I feel like nobody really listens." The words hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed, turning my attention fully to him. "I'm listening now," I said softly. And that's when he surprised me. He started talking, really talking, about school, his friends, the things that worried him, even the little victories he was proud of. There was honesty in his voice that made the car feel warmer somehow, like the ordinary morning had become a sacred space just for the two of us. I realized I hadn't just given him a ride. He had trusted me to hold his thoughts, his feelings, and that was a rare thing for a 10-year-old. By the time we pulled up to school, I felt a strange mix of pride and protectiveness. I turned to him, expecting a casual thanks and a rush out the door, but instead he lingered, looking at me with a sincerity that made me catch my breath. "Mrs. Lane, I don't think anyone's ever asked me how I really feel before," he said quietly. I smiled, my heart a little tighter than usual. "Well, you can always tell me, Tommy. I'll always listen." And with that, he hopped out of the car, waved, and disappeared into the morning chaos of the schoolyard. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, feeling a strange warmth and a little ache at the same time. That short drive had been more than just a favor. It had been an unexpected bridge into someone's world, and I knew, somehow, my ordinary Thursday morning had changed forever. The next morning, I woke up feeling a strange anticipation I hadn't felt in years. I didn't usually think about small errands or school runs, but somehow I found myself hoping I might see Tommy again. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice the little things, the dew on the grass, the way the sunlight glinted off car windows, the hum of a distant lawnmower. I was halfway through my coffee when I heard a knock at the door. Peeking out, I saw Tommy standing there, backpack in place, his small hand wrapped tightly around the straps. "Morning, Mrs. Lane," he said, his voice a little more confident than yesterday. "Morning, Tommy. Ready for another ride?" I asked, smiling. He nodded and climbed in, sliding into the seat with a familiarity that warmed me. The car smelled the same, but now the cinnamon seemed sweeter somehow, mixed with the faint scent of the crisp autumn air. As we drove, I tried to keep the conversation light, asking about homework, friends, little everyday things, but I could tell he had more on his mind. Finally, he spoke, almost in a rush, as if he'd been holding it back. "Mrs. Lane, Do you ever feel like people expect you to be a certain way? Like you're just stuck being one thing? I turned to him, intrigued. Sometimes, yes. Everyone has expectations of themselves, of others. But it's okay to feel differently, to want something unexpected. He nodded slowly, staring out the window again. Then he did something that caught me completely off guard. He reached over and gently squeezed my hand. I'm glad you listened to me, he said softly. For a moment, my heart skipped. There was a tenderness in that gesture, innocent yet full of trust, that I wasn't sure I'd ever experienced in this way. I squeezed back gently, careful to show support without making him uncomfortable. And I always will, Tommy. You can tell me anything. The rest of the ride was filled with a quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't need many words. I found myself thinking about how rare it was to connect with someone on such a deep level in just a few minutes. There was no judgment, no expectation, just presence. And somehow that felt revolutionary. When we reached the school, Tommy lingered again. He looked at me, a little hesitant, then said, "You make me feel like I matter." I felt a lump in my throat. "You do matter, Tommy, more than you know." He smiled, a small, shy, but radiant smile, and ran toward the school, leaving me sitting there with the engine ticking softly. I realized that these moments, these short rides, had become more than just a favor or a routine. They were a window into a world I hadn't expected to enter, a place of trust, honesty, and unexpected emotional connection. Driving home, I felt reflective, a little shaken, and more alive than I had in years. There was something about nurturing someone else's heart, especially someone so young, that made me see my own life differently. I didn't know where this connection would go or how it would evolve, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer just a neighbor. I was a witness to a small, precious life, and that realization changed everything. A few days passed, and those short rides to school became a quiet ritual. Each morning, I found myself looking forward to Tommy's knock at the door, the sound of his small footsteps on my porch, the way he'd climb into my car with that mixture of shyness and trust. It was strange how quickly he had become part of my mornings, and even stranger how much I realized I cared about him, not just as a neighbor, but as someone who trusted me with his thoughts, his fears, and his little triumphs. One morning, the sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, the kind of light that makes the world feel softer and more forgiving. Tommy slid into the passenger seat and immediately began talking about a project at school. He had that spark in his eyes, the one that comes when a child discovers something exciting. But then, halfway through his story, his voice dropped. "Mrs. Lane, do you ever feel lonely?" I paused, the question settling in the car like a warm weight. I thought about my life, the quiet afternoons, the empty house, the absence of someone to share small moments with. "Sometimes I do," I admitted, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "But talking to people I care about helps. And listening to you, it's a kind of company too." He nodded slowly, as if absorbing that in a way that only children can. Then, unexpectedly, he leaned forward just slightly, resting his small hand on mine. "I like that. That you listen," he said quietly. For a moment, I felt a flush of emotion that was both surprising and comforting. It wasn't romantic or inappropriate. It was the raw, simple warmth of human connection. I realized that I had been craving this kind of understanding too, this unspoken acknowledgement that someone truly sees you. The drive continued with a tender silence, broken only by the occasional chatter about school or what he hoped to do over the weekend. But beneath the words, there was a subtle bond forming, one built on trust, empathy, and mutual respect. I found myself noticing little details I hadn't before, the way his hair caught the sunlight, the nervous way he fiddled with his backpack straps, the quiet determination behind his questions about life and feelings. When we reached the school, Tommy hesitated before stepping out. "Mrs. Lane, thank you," he said softly, his eyes meeting mine with an honesty that made my chest tighten. "For noticing me." I smiled, feeling a lump in my throat. "Always, Tommy, never forget that." As he ran toward the school, I stayed in the car for a moment longer, letting the warmth of the morning sun wash over me. I thought about how life had a way of surprising you, how a small act of kindness could open doors to something far deeper than I could have imagined. These rides were no longer just about giving him a lift. They were about sharing a space where both of us felt seen and valued. Driving home, I felt a quiet reflection settle over me. I had discovered something important, that connection doesn't always come in grand gestures. It often arrives in subtle, unexpected moments. And sometimes the people who teach us the most about trust and compassion are the ones we least expect. The morning air was crisp, the kind that makes you want to breathe slowly and take in every detail. I grabbed my coffee, expecting the usual quiet before the day began. But when I opened the door, Tommy was already there, his backpack neatly zipped, and his shoes slightly scuffed from running around. There was a seriousness in his gaze today that made me pause. "Morning, Mrs. Lane," he said, climbing into the car without his usual hesitation. "Morning, Tommy. Everything okay?" I asked, noting the thoughtful set of his small shoulders. He nodded, but he didn't start talking immediately. We drove in silence, the engine's hum and the faint scent of autumn leaves outside the window filling the space. There was an unspoken understanding between us now, one that didn't need constant chatter to feel complete. Finally he spoke, and his words caught me off guard. "Mrs. Lane, do you think it's possible for someone to really trust you, even when life feels complicated?" I glanced at him, feeling the depth of his question. "I think it is, Tommy. Trust isn't about never being afraid or never making mistakes. It's about believing someone will be there for you, even when things are messy." He considered that, his small fingers twisting the strap of his backpack. Then he looked up at me with a seriousness that made my chest ache. "I feel like I can tell you anything, and that makes me feel brave." For a moment I was quiet, letting the weight of that sink in. The idea that a child could feel bravery through trust. It was both humbling and profoundly moving. "You are brave, Tommy. More than you know," I said, squeezing his hand gently. The rest of the ride passed with a soft, reflective silence. The sunlight slanted through the trees, casting playful shadows across the dashboard, and I realized how much these simple mornings had changed me. I felt lighter, more open, more attuned to the small, precious moments that make life meaningful. When we pulled up to the school, Tommy lingered, looking up at me with that mixture of shyness and honesty that had become so familiar. "Thank you for listening, Mrs. Lane." "Really listening," he said softly. I smiled, feeling a lump in my throat. "Always, Tommy. You can always count on that." He hopped out of the car, waved briefly, and disappeared into the schoolyard. I sat there for a moment, the engine ticking softly as I watched him blend into the morning bustle. My heart was full, not with longing or loss, but with a quiet, profound sense of connection. I realized that trust, honesty, and compassion were gifts we could give freely, even in small, ordinary moments, and that sometimes the people who change our lives most are the ones who enter unexpectedly. Driving home, I felt reflective and strangely grateful. The world outside the car seemed brighter, softer, filled with endless possibility. I had discovered something essential about myself, that opening your heart to another, even briefly, can teach you more about courage, empathy, and the beauty of being truly seen than years of solitary reflection ever could. And as I parked in my driveway, I knew that this small, quiet bond, the rides, the conversations, the simple act of listening, would stay with me forever. Life had given me a gift, wrapped in the unexpected trust of a young boy, and I was determined to cherish it every single day.